realize that the only time I've ever been scared in an airplane is because I did something wrong. I have nothing that even comes close to the veterans who have gone across the line into combat. My little bit of time in Afghanistan, our biggest threat was probably from food poisoning. So, that great presentation with the SAMs and everybody else who has really gone out and done the job, thank you. Okay, I'm here simply because I got dealt a set of cards that was partially my own fault, and it was a problem I had to deal with. But I do want to do a quick follow-up. I found it very amazing listening to that presentation, because the descriptions that he talks about, the rattlesnake, the Star of David, the puppy paw, that is still being taught to current generation fighter pilots. The SA-2 is still a threat to current fighter pilots. My buddy flying over Kosovo in an F-15 had one go by close enough at night that he saw the missile. It also did not detonate on him, and he's very thankful for it. Where is it in today's modern Air Force? When I graduated from pilot training in 1993, I had a friend go fly F-4 Wild Weasels. And when I was at Mountain Home flying Eagles, 2004 time frame to 2006, the F-16 CJ now carries that mission. They are shooting two weapons, basically a high-speed anti-radiation missile, extremely accurate, to kind of give them a little different tool. The high-speed aspect was calculated that they know how fast a SAM can travel to you, so we will make a missile that is faster. So when you shoot, I shoot second, mine blows up first. And it is a very effective weapon. And when you go back and look at what happened in Gulf War I, Gulf War II, Kosovo, surface-to-air missiles are still a huge threat. The reason we have the F-22, and whether you believe it's a good airplane or not, is because it has to be able to stand off against ultra-long-range, 100-mile-plus SA-10s and 5 surface-to-air missiles. That is why that capability was developed. So it is still a critical, very critical mission. It's much easier to build a good SAM than it is to build a high-tech fighter to outdo it. So, what I'm going to talk about here is a situation that occurred to me a few years ago. And as you've heard, the ACES II is the ejection seat that is in most of the modern Air Force aircraft. A-10, F-16, F-15, the B-1s, the F-22 now has an advanced version of it as well. And as you can tell by the headline there, that I had a rather interesting ride one day on it. For those who've heard the story before, Bud, feel free to fall asleep, I won't blame you. if I start to make the story better, no fair calling BS. All right, show of hands, how many fighter pilots are in the room? Okay. You guys can fight over who's the second best fighter pilot, because right there was the best fighter pilot in the Air Force. That picture was taken in April of 1994. I had been fortunate enough to have just graduated from Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training at Sheppard Air Force Base. Fortunate enough to have gotten the top of my class ranking and was able to select an F-15 for my follow-on training. And I had just completed the basic qualification in the jet when this picture was taken. 25 years old, I had orders in hand for my first assignment of choice, which was up at Elmendorf Air Force Base, Alaska. Growing up in Moses Lake, Washington, unfortunately the 318th was closed at Tacoma at McCord, so I couldn't do that, so let's go to Alaska and fly them. 1 month later, May 5th of 1994, I was doing what is called mission qual training. So having qualified as a basic pilot in the F-15, now I was going to get the mission top off, and what it was we had some additional secrets and weapons and capabilities that they didn't teach you until you got to your combat mission ready unit. What was happening this day was I was going to go out and do a basic fighter maneuver, or just a good old classic dogfighting sortie against another instructor. Because it was the mission qual training phase, the instructor no longer was going to use a reduction of power or a reduction of G's. It was going to be his best fight against my best fight. He has 1,500 hours doing this, and I have 60 hours doing this. Anybody want to take bets on how this is going to go?
Yeah.
I had been starting the fight as briefed in a defensive position, and we would either start at 3,000, 6,000, or 9,000 foot ranges at the beginning of these fights. On the 6,000 foot range of which we were starting, Typically, if I do a good brake turn and the offender does a strong brake turn as well, he immediately will have a short-range, heat-seeking AIM-9 missile whiz on me. To be able to get out of that whiz and prevent him from shooting that missile, because you're not going to out-BFM an AIM-9, we would execute a very classic maneuver, and just as his nose would start to approach about 15 degrees behind my tail, we would do what's called a split or a ditch maneuver. And it's basically rolling almost completely inverted and doing a split S back in front of where the second aircraft that's trying to shoot you is going to go. By changing the fight from a horizontal plane of motion into a vertical plane of motion, it gives that offender a problem that he now has to resolve. It gives him one more chance to be too late or too early to follow me, or to extend his airplane, try to ask for more turn and bleed off more energy. Now, it sounds simple when I'm explaining this, but realize that what I'm doing is I'm looking over my shoulder, pulling 7 to 8 Gs, and trying to analyze the difference between if you go 2 degrees too early or 2 degrees too late, it makes it either really easy or you're dead. Well, a very typical student error, any of us out here who have been instructors, you can always go and tell that brand new guy, here's the mistakes you're going to make today. Well, guess what? Late ditches is a very common mistake to start learning when you're fighting the F-15. And I had been late on several of these ditch maneuvers. So, like any good instructor, my instructor that day, his name was Spitter Swallow. Bummer being French. But he says, you go on offense, I will go defense, I will demonstrate the proper timing of this ditch maneuver for you to take another look at it. Now, if anybody has ever studied or knows the factors associated with tactical flying, G-induced loss of consciousness is a very big threat to high-performance jets. It occurred back in the World War II. We had P-51 pilots coming out of high-speed dives experiencing it. They didn't know what it was, didn't usually know what happened. It occurred in Vietnam, and it occurred in Korea, and it was a big problem. We started getting fourth-generation fighters such as the F-15, the F-16, now that can sustain extremely high Gs, or sustain what we call moderate high Gs, 4, 5, 6 Gs for unlimited amount of time. The more dogfights you do, the higher your risk. If you get distracted, the higher your risk. If you're tired, the higher your risk. If you're fighting over environmental conditions where you don't have as good visual on the horizon, the higher your risk. Kind of sounds like everything we do every day flying F-15s in Florida. But that's just a hazard of the business, okay? Remember, nobody was shooting at me, so it wasn't so bad. Yeah. But in this situation that day, we swapped the roles, and while I was now being the offender, concentrating on the geometry of exactly when Spitter started to outmaneuver me, I made a couple critical errors. Errors that I actually didn't know what they were until I went to safety school 7 years later and read my own accident report. But what happened was on the initial brake turn at the fight's on, my initial brake turn was not as strong as it should be. We would like to get a good 8.5 G brake turn. Mine was about 6 or about 7.5 to 7. So what happened was the geometry of the fight causes me to have to do a secondary brake turn over here on the back side. And that's very typical on any 6,000 foot engagement. But that tighten down or that secondary brake turn usually is about a 6G, real quick little square the corner. And if you've done everything right, you've then got a missile shot. How many people here played football? Okay? Did you put in 110% on every single play when you knew that it was going the other way over here? No, you couldn't because you'd wear yourself out. Well, when you're dogfighting, it's the exact same way. We learn subconsciously to strain against the G-forces. We do that by taking a big breath. We start to tighten the muscles between our calves, our thighs, our buttocks, our abs to help reduce the amount of blood that can be in our lower extremities, forces it up so that our heart has enough blood pressure to keep the blood pumping to our brain, so our eyes work and our brain works and we can keep flying the airplane. The problem is if I strain as hard as I can every single time I pull G's, I'm going to be completely exhausted and I'm going to end up going unconscious due to fatigue. If you don't strain enough, you can still go unconscious. Most people think that G-LOC occurs at the really high G levels, the 6Gs and above, and statistically most of our G-LOCs occur in the 4 to 6G range due to a fatigue issue, or most of us fighter pilots had back then a resting G tolerance of 3.5 to 4.5 Gs. What's that mean? I can sit in a centrifuge at 4 Gs myself and I still have over half my vision. Well, in this situation this day, when I got to this secondary brake turn, because my initial brake turn was a little bit weak, I didn't bleed off as much energy, as much airspeed as we typically did in a fight. Just as you talked about dodging the SAMs and not running to run out of airspeed, just as Bud deals with flying an air show and knowing that having too much energy is just as bad as not having enough energy, and in many of the other airplanes it's still the same situation, I ended up having more energy, about 40 more knots at that secondary brake turn than I realized. So when I went to strain for what would be about a 6G tighten down, the airplane had enough kinetic or airspeed to give myself 7.5 Gs. And what happened is at 20,000 feet, when full afterburner with 50,000 pounds of thrust coming out of a great McDonnell Douglas product, I go unconscious. Just as I have done this, Spitter has gone into his ditch maneuver. Okay, we'll wait. Spitter's gone into a ditch maneuver and he sees my jet start to go in a straight line. And he said in his mind, every G-LOC video I have ever seen, every incident we have ever studied, and we got them all the time, flashed through my mind. He goes, I knew exactly what was wrong with you because that's the only reason your jet would start in a straight line. He called to knock it off. Our call sign that day was Mach. Mach flight, knock it off. Mach 1, knock it off out of him. Of course, I don't answer. Bad call sign. He tries it again, no answer. So then he knows that a lot of times the first thing will start to come back when somebody has been unconscious due to G's is their eyes. Unfortunately, you'll wake up and see yourself die before you have enough muscle capability and higher brain power, let alone basic brain power, to correct the situation. 2 years before me, a young pilot, same situation in his career as myself, woke up from the G-induced loss of consciousness over the water. We know flying over the water you have very little depth perception. You've got to come in and read the instruments to really know how high you are. The F-15 is the last of the great fighters. There's no fly-by-wire computer. If I have enough airspeed, it will give me all the G's I've got airspeed. Unfortunately for this young man, he had enough airspeed that at 15 G's, he broke both main spars on the wings. Both wings separated. The ACES II ejection seat was built with a single initiator. We had had a history of those single initiators failing and the seat not successfully ejecting. He was the last of the single initiator failures. He pulled the handle, seat didn't leave the airplane, he unfortunately passed away. We briefed that every day during a BFM sortie. Don't wake up from a G-LOC at a face full of ocean and rip the wings off the jet. After this episode, we added the caveat too. If you must get out, slow down first. So what will end up happening is 25 seconds later, I will wake up and I will see that I don't know why I am going faster than I have ever gone in an F-15, and it is nowhere near as fast as an F-4 or an F-105. They say it's a Mach 2.5 airplane. That's only if we strip it down and try to set speed records. With a combat load, it was really about a Mach 1.5 airplane, to be honest. But I am going faster than I've ever been going. I don't know why I am in this attitude now. I don't know why I'm approaching 10,000 feet, which is our minimum out-of-control ejection altitude. Spitter has turned around and is now chasing me. He has locked me up with his radar, so he knows my speed, he knows my altitude, he sees that I'm approaching the out-of-control bailout altitude, and he's now just calling me by my call sign. Back then it was Moose. So he's just telling me, Moose, roll wings level, pull your power back, pull your nose up. He's trying to fly the airplane through my ears, because that is what's going to start to occur. I'll hear things again before I have the major muscle capability for my brain recovering to fly the airplane. As I approach 10,000 feet, I have woke up enough to realize that I now need to get out of this airplane. Remember that comment? The only time I've been scared in an airplane is for something I did? Okay, I was scared. The attitude is, if you're a dead man, when you pull the handles on an ejection seat, if everything goes well, you will live. And that is really what I was faced with. The ACES II ejection seat has a 600 knot speed limit. And it's not because the seat fails at 600 knots. the monkey strapped to the seat starts to come apart at about 420 knots. You start to experience flailing injuries and other situations like that. Looking at the altitude of 10,000 feet at the speed that I was descending, for about the next 8 seconds, I could have done an emergency dive recovery. In the Eagle, that is idle, speed brake, and 12 Gs. Well, a guy who's just woke up from being unconscious doesn't wake up and do that very well. It's not a maneuver that we practice, and it's sure not a maneuver that's easy to do, and we have killed a lot of people trying to do that. We have a great example of an F-16 guy that G-LOCs himself once, wakes up, twice, wakes up 3 times. Each time getting closer and closer to the water. Thankfully, he did survive. Passing 10,000 feet, I remember what's been taught to me in my briefings. I know I'm out of control. I don't know why I'm here. When I say out of control, the situation's out of control. I reach down to each legs and pull the ejection handles. The problem is, when I pull the handles, I am doing 640 knots indicated airspeed, 735 mile an hour, Mach 1.13. This is what the ejection sequence looks like on an ACES II. This seat is very smart. It has an altimeter, it has 2 pitot booms. It knows where you are and what you're doing. It knows that when I pull the ejection handle, the canopy is going to come off and immediately the seat is going to fire because we now have 2 initiators. As I leave the canopy coverage right here, I get exposed to a wind blast of 1,500 pounds per square foot. So this is a 1,500 pound arm. The leg is now weighing approximately 3,000 pounds, and I have about 4,500 pounds on my torso. You stay strapped into your seat at this point. It is providing the exoskeleton protection that you need to keep your spine and everything and your arms and legs protected. The seat knows that we're going fast enough that I must slow down with the seat before we can start to open the main parachute. Because if I open the main parachute right here, it's just going to turn into a rag and I'm done. So 0.3 of a second after I pull the handle, I've exposed myself to a 1,500 pound per square foot wind blast, which starts to, unfortunately, due to my speed, flail my arms and legs. When this chute deploys right here at 600 knots, it is a 40 G deceleration out the front. So in 0.3 of a second, everything has gone from normal to back out front. The seat then will start to monitor its speed, and as it approaches approximately 200 knots, will start to deploy the main parachute, which comes out of a capsule right behind my headrest. It's actually built into the headrest. From the time I pull the handles going 640 knots until the time I have a full chute with a survival raft and a survival kit deployed below me is about 2.5 seconds. And about 2,000 feet of altitude loss. Okay? Theoretically, I could have waited, at 10,000 feet, I could have waited about another 7 to 9 seconds and pulled the handle, got one swing, and gone in the water. Probably not the recommended technique. This is a picture of an ACES II, just to kind of give you an idea. This is a low-speed ejection. The reason we know that is the rocket motor is still firing, and the main canopy is already being deployed. I show this because it gives you a good example of a couple of features on the ACES II-C. You see this lower leg bracket. This is designed to keep the lower legs from flailing out to the sides. The handles, when you pull them up, actually provide a lateral bracket to keep your upper legs, your knee region, in line. There's an oxygen bottle right here. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, and that's your emergency bailout bottle that is on the left-hand side of the seat. That will become a factor for me here in a second. This is a high-speed ejection in an ACES II on a test sled at Alamogordo, New Mexico at Holloman. This is a supersonic ride. It's configured as an F-16 seat, but it's the exact same seat for us. A couple things to look at. It's actually turned around going the other way, but the image is inversed. Here is the oxygen bottle. Notice where the guy's forearm is. Yeah, that's that one. That's called a signature high-speed ACES II fracture. Okay? You'll notice the lower leg brace and his legs being contained and held against it. Here's the hose, which usually goes from here up to your mask. And you see that it's pulled over to the side. Look at how severely his visor is compressed in on the helmet and the face. It's very common that the air in an ACES II ejection, especially on an upright seat such as the Eagle, it'll hit this portion, come down the back of the helmet, and your shoulder harnesses the reel has retracted and held you forcefully against the seat. So when the air hits the upper portion of your back and shoulders, it has nowhere to go, so it turns around, comes up, catches the back of the helmet, and pulls the helmet off. Anything over about 450, if you keep a helmet on during ejection, you're lucky. So what is going to happen to me is my left arm is going to do that. My helmet does come off during the ejection and proceeds to give me a pretty good concussion as well. That 1,500 pounds of square foot of air pressure on my lower legs, that is enough that it compresses my calf against the bottom of the seat and takes my lower leg and shoves it out the back of my knee socket, dislocating. Don't worry.
Did you survive?
We're not even doing the bad part.
Did you survive? He didn't survive.
That tears out both my ACL and my PCL ligaments, which keep your knees from going forward and aft on both legs. We take out both of them. What happens is, now because my lower legs are not really attached the way they should be, and due to the speeds, my lower right leg will come up over that knee brace here, and basically my right foot ends up over here. Now, lucky for me, my left leg is a follower, because it went to the right with my right leg and proceeded now to have 2 feet up here for kicking me in the butt for being stupid and going to sleep on it. Because about 9 months after being a Strike Eagle crew, being flown by Brian Udell, his backseater was in, obviously, the back seat, but they fly with their legs spread apart so it doesn't interfere with the stick during the dogfighting. And when they left the jet at 640 knots, almost exact situation as mine, his legs went opposite direction. He ended up fatally dying from femoral bleeding when his belt was separated.